Hi, this is Sean Hafer, and in this tutorial, we will be going over the sort of basics of After Effects. You could see this as an introduction or maybe just a refresher. And what we'll be doing is creating a quick little animation utilizing some icons from Illustrator, some voiceover recordings and Audition, as well as a little music background and using some techniques such as trim paths and some of the basic animation techniques. Let me pull up here, and this will be an example of what we are going to be creating. So right here. How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project? All right, so that's basically what we'll be creating here in this tutorial. So I've got the files. There'll be a link below for you to download those, and let's get started. First off, we'll just talk really quickly about Adobe After Effects and what our sort of main areas are here. Now, I am using my default layout. So if you come up here to the top, go to default, and I'm going to click the little hamburger icon and go to reset to saved layout. So that way, hopefully mine looks exactly like yours, and it'll be easier to follow along. Next up, we'll just look at some of our areas here. Our project panel. This is where all of our assets will go. Everything we import, Photoshop files, Illustrator files, audio, video clips, everything comes right into this area. Next window here is our composition window. This is basically where anything that's happening on our timeline will show up, right? So this is kind of where all of our animation and our effects and everything happens right here. Over here are all of our panels. We've got our info up here first. This will give us our RGBA values. It'll give us our position of our cursor, things like that. Also, we've got all of our panels here for different things such as audio, our effects and presets, preview, and various things here. So we'll be going through those as we are creating things. And then our last but not least down here at the bottom is our timeline. So this is where everything happens. We will be importing as we add things to our timeline. They will show up as layers here, and then that window will show in the composition window up here. All right, so what we're going to do first is create a new composition. And we can do this a few ways. We can go up to Composition, New Composition here. We could hit Command or Control N on our keyboard to create a new composition. Or we could just click on this icon right here for a new composition. We could also come down here and click on this little icon of the comp that looks kind of like a little movie frame and create a composition that way. So I'll click, so any way you want to do it, I'm just going to click on this one. And now I'm going to come in, let's name our composition, main comp. And we'll have multiple compositions in this. So this will be our main one. We will have our settings. Okay, so let's go to the presets, go down to HDV, HDTV 720, 29.97. Okay, hit that. So that'll give us a 1280 by 720 pixel composition. So 720p. We've got square pixels. 29.97 is our frame rate. Resolution is half. This is just how it'll show up, the setting when we open it. I'll show you that in a second. And then we have our start time code and our duration. So here I'm going to go ahead and make sure yours might not be at 30 seconds. So what this is, the way to look at this is we've got starting from right to left, frames. So we'd have, 29, basically 30 frames for every second. So frames, then seconds, then minutes, then hours. So what I want to do is make this 30 seconds. So I can just go in, hit 30 and then 0.0. And I'll just click over here, and now you can see that gave me 30. If I needed a 10-second composition or a 1 minute and 10 second, I could go 1.10.0 and then click over here, and you can see that is 1 minute, 10 seconds, and 0 frames. But we want to do 30 seconds, so just 30.0. And then I'm going to click over here. There we go. 30.0 is great. And then background color. Now, background color will not render. It will always render black unless you have an actual layer with a color in your comp. But sometimes for working, if you're working on a lot of black text or certain color objects, you'll want that to maybe have a color that you can see, but it will not change. So we'll just leave that as black, and then we will hit OK. All right, so now you can see we just have this black rectangle here. This is our composition now showing up. And now we've got our timeline showing how many seconds. So we're 0 to 30 seconds. And then over here is where everything will be. Now let's go ahead and import some footage and some assets. So we can do that again a couple of ways. So we can either double click up in our project window, and that'll open up our import window. We can go to File, Import, and then File here, and then that's there. Or we could hit Control or Command I. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm on a PC, so I'll do Control I, and it'll open up your import window. So you can just navigate to wherever you're at. So I'm going to go to my AE Intro 01 folder, and we can see we've got a couple things here. And then here I can see from my icons, and over here with type, we've got an MP3 file. I've got an After Effects file in here. So that's just will be this completed project. If you want to take a look at that, we've got icon design, photo and video. Those are Illustrator files. We've got an MP4 file, which is the video of the finished one that I showed at the beginning of the tutorial. We've got an AIF file, which is often a Apple or Macintosh format. It's an uncompressed audio file format. And then we've got a WAV file, which is another audio format that is also an uncompressed format. So what I can do, I can select one of these, or I could select multiples. So I can go ahead and Shift select or Command or Control select. So what I want to do, let's get Blop, and I'm going to select icon, design, photo, and video, and then Music 01, and then VO how many. All right, and so down here, there's some options of how to import it. We're just going to import as footage. You could import this as a composition, but we're going to do footage in this tutorial, and then I'm just going to hit import. And now you can see these all come up over here in our project window. One important thing to think about is organization when you're working in After Effects. As you keep importing assets and video assets and photos and Photoshop documents and Illustrator documents and voiceover files and sound effects files and music files, all of these things can really quickly get overwhelming. So we have a little system in here with folders that we can organize. So the way we can do this, you can click on the little folder here, and that'll create a folder, and then we could just name that. So let's say we'll call this audio. All right. And so now we could grab Blop SFX. We can grab Music 01 and drag that into there. And we can also grab our voiceover and drag that into there. Now we can just sort of get this out of the way if we don't need to see that. Another one we can do a comps folder. So I'm going to just this time do it a different way. I'm going to take what I want and drag it onto the folder, right? Let go. And now that'll create a folder. I'll call that compositions or comps. And now we've got that here with our main comp gets put into that. And we could do the same thing with these three. Just drag them in. And maybe we'll call this assets. And maybe vector. All right, so assets, vector. So now we've got our three folders. If we want to change the color of those, you can select a different label color. So we could maybe make this aqua, maybe click on this icon, make it purple. And now we've got those folders and with just different colors. So again, easier for us to see what we've got going on. So now we're ready to go. We've got our main comp open, and we can tell that because if we look at our timeline, down here it says main comp. And let's go ahead. We've got a 30-second comp, and let's bring in our first asset. So the first thing we're going to bring in here is our audio. And a lot of times, depending on the project, the audio might set the length of your composition. So we'll first get this in to make sure that it's long enough or not too long for what we need to do. So I'm going to grab VO how many. And if you want to preview this, you could always just double click it. And that'll open up it as footage over here in our sort of comp window. And you can just use your space bar.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project? How many times have you...
Okay, so now we know what that is. We've previewed it. I'm just going to click on my little X up here to close that. And let's drag that down into our composition. Okay, now, so what happened here, as you saw, I'm going to undo. As I dragged this down, you see this little time indicator above, that little blue mark, moving back and forth with it. Now, if I can watch that and drop it in a certain spot, that'll put the beginning of this clip in that area, but then that'll be right there. So right now I'm kind of in the center. So if I hit play down here on by hitting my space bar, it's going to go through all these seconds before it even gets to it. So what I want to do, I'm going to talk about a few little shortcuts that we can use to sort of help this kind of thing out. So first off, in the composition, we can move, we've got our playhead here, our time indicator, and we can move that by hitting space, right? As I hit there, that's play. You can also hit the number pad 0 if you have that. We can also move this by hitting home or end on your keyboard. So home goes to the beginning of your comp, end goes to the end. If you want to go to the beginning of just the layer that you have selected, then with that we can use I, just like in Premiere, in and out. So I goes to the in point of your layer. The shortcut O goes to the out point of your layer, okay? Now we can use our brackets as well to move our layer around. So if we use our left bracket, that will move the in point of our layer. It will actually move our layer so that the in point is where the time indicator is. So if I hit my left bracket, it will move over to that point. If I hit my right bracket, it'll move the out point, the last frame of that layer, to the time indicator. So if I wanted to move my layer to the beginning of my clip, I could hit home to move my time indicator, and then I could hit that left bracket and snap it right to the beginning. Now you can also grab your layer and move things around, right? So that's possible. So you can just click and drag, but for precision, a lot of times I'll use these shortcuts. And throughout the tutorial, if I use them, I'll try to make sure I call them out. So again, I'll hit my left bracket and snap right in there. Now some other keys we can use. If we want to move the playhead forward a frame, you can hit Command or Control and your right arrow. And you can see over here in our time indicator that it is moving just one frame at a time every time I hit it. And then again, Command or Control and your left arrow will give you back one frame. And you can see I can go negative frames, negative in time. So be careful that you don't do that. So I'm going to hit home just to make sure I'm at 0, 0. And now we'll also go to, let's look at a shift and Command or Control, and your arrows will go 10 frames at a time. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get back to 0 by hitting home, and I'm going to do Command or Control Shift, right arrow, just to go 10 frames forward. And then I'm going to want my voiceover to start at that 10 frames part. So now I can just go ahead and hit my left bracket, and that'll snap to the playhead. So now I know with a few keystrokes that I've gone from home to 0, went forward 10 frames by a Control Shift right arrow, and then by using my left bracket, it snapped the beginning of my layer to that point. So we know we're going to start here at 10 seconds. Now, one thing we have not done, which is my bad, is we want to save this project, right? So let's go ahead and File, Save As, and I am just going to put this in the same folder with all the assets in it, and I will call this Icon Animation. And save. Great. So now we've got that saved. We're feeling good about that. So we've got this layer. Everything is going great. You can see we have colors on the layers too. If you want to color code layers a certain way, you can just click on this icon here and then pick different colors. So maybe we want that to go blue. So we've got our audio. We can hit spacebar again to play it.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible?
Okay. And now we can also, one thing, if we come up here and click on our audio tab, now we'll see our levels. Now again, you never want your audio to go above 0 dB, right? That's going to be distorted. So we're going to try and make sure by just looking at this real quick that it is in a good level to play. So I'm going to hit play.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer?
Okay, I think that's fine. And I actually might just use this control here. This is kind of like a volume control. So if I select this layer again, I'm just going to bring it down a little so while we're working here, it doesn't get too annoying in the tutorial. So let's listen a little more.
Videographer and graphic design.
Okay, so that's better. That'll be okay for now. Again, we can always turn off the audio, mute things over here by clicking this little speaker icon.
Designer for your project.
Okay, so we can go that route too. So we're going to have that there. Now you can also see that there's a few markers built into this audio, and I put these in Audition. And you can put markers in After Effects, of course, by using the asterisk key or the multiplication key on your number keyboard. But when I was doing this in Audition, I went ahead and put those markers in. So if I need to use this open it back up in Audition, they'll still be there. If I need to put it into After Effects, they'll show up. Premiere, they'll show up. Any other software that imports markers will have that information. So I just went ahead and set them up in advance, but we could set them up here as well. So when you see those, that's how those got in there. I put those in Audition. Okay, now let's talk about what we're going to do. So first off, let's create our background layer. So I'm going to come up here, go to Layer, New Layer, or New Solid actually is what we're going to do, and hit that. Now you can see solid settings. Now solid is just basically a raster solid, a rectangle, right? You can use these for objects. You can use these for backgrounds. It's just a simple way. The difference between that and a shape layer is it's not vector based. So for this, we're not going to change it. We're just going to leave it as it is. So we're going to go ahead and just use a gray solid. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. So here we can say make comp size, just in case you want to make sure it'll be 1280 by 720. And then let's go into our color and let's get this to about a middle gray. So here, let's change that to 50. And that looks good. And I'll hit OK and OK. All right, so now we've got that. Now, if we came up here and clicked on this accidentally, we might move it around. I'm just going to undo to get that back. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this solid. But before I do that, I'm going to change its name. So I'm going to click on my layer and then just hit Enter, my Enter key. And that'll allow me to edit the name. Double clicking won't do it. Double clicking will open it up in our comp window as footage. So now I'll just call this background. All right. Now I'm going to move this to the bottom by dragging. Now another way you could do that is if you hold down your Command or Control and use your same bracket keys, left brings it down, right brings it up. So if you've got a layer and you want to move those around and you've got those selected, you can do that as well. And to select those layers, you would just do your Control and up and down arrows. So Command or Control plus up arrow selects my top layer, and then Command Control down arrow gives me that selection. So again, you can even, without using your mouse, really get in here, select what you want. And if I had that, then I did Command, Control, and bracket. You could bring it down below, or right bracket, bring it up above. So those are just some more shortcuts to speed up your workflow if you want to. All right, so now we've got our background on the bottom. I'm going to click this lock icon, and now we've got it locked, so I can't select it anymore. I can't even select it over here. You'll see it just gives me a blink. A lock really helps protect objects. So if you've got something you don't want to accidentally move or adjust, turn on that lock and you'll be in good shape. So we've got our little gray background here. Let's go ahead and throw in some type. So our first words are...
How many times have you struggled to find...
How many times? So what we'll do is we'll add some text. So let's go up, click on our text tool, and we'll click in here, and we'll type in how many hit enter, and then we'll do times ? And I'll go back to my selection tool. And we'll sort of set this up maybe around here, but let's change our sort of font and color a little bit. So if I come in, let's double click this. I'm just going to highlight my top here. And let's go to, I think this is fine, universe. But let me do, I'll do a condensed. Oh, not condensed. I'll do a condensed at 72. That seems great. And then down below, I'll have my universe black extended, which was already on there. And also at 72, that's pretty close. Maybe I could try and give that a little, could take it up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so maybe give that about a 74. That seems good. And then I'll set my leading to 60, which it's already at. All right, because if we put it, we can throw it to auto. Let me select all this again, sorry. If we throw it to auto, that's a little too much. So I went in and just went to 60. All right, that feels a little tighter. And now what I want to do is maybe get into a little bit of this kerning here. So we could come over here and use our kerning there, or we could also use the shortcut Option or Alt and use our arrow keys there. So if I go, my back arrow, you can see just jumping in there, adjust that a little bit. All right. So once you get that where you like it, if you wanted to change the color a little bit, I used a little bit of a light blue. Maybe I'll give it a little more saturation. That looks good. And I think that's fine. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool, sort of set it up. And what we'll do is just have this sort of fade in when that hits. So let's listen.
How many times have you?
So how many times? So about here. And now I could go ahead and I could just have this layer start there. So I could just hit my bracket key, right? So I want my left bracket, and that'll jump right to that point. And what we're going to do is have this fade up, and then we'll have it drop down with a little bit of anticipation. So I'm going to come over here to my layer so we can see what my properties are. So I've got our text. If we roll that down, we can see all our things that we can animate, source text, path, options, etc. And then I also have transform. Now this transform will be everything for this layer. And you can see we've got anchor point, and that's where that anchor point is. We've got our position, scale, rotation, and opacity or transparency. Now we could have all of these rolled down, and to set a keyframe, we just can hit these little stopwatches. So we're going to want position, and we're going to want opacity, and we can leave all these down here, but there's a couple other ways we can get to it. So I'm going to go ahead and roll this all back up, and I'm going to have that selected and hit U. Now what U will do is just show us the animated properties. So I'm going to go ahead and hit U. We've got our two animated properties. We can also use shortcuts such as P for just position. We could use T for opacity, transparency, right? We can use R for rotation. We can use S for scale and A for anchor point. And if you wanted a couple of those, you could just do a shift. So if I said I want my position and I want my opacity, so I could just do Shift T, and then I get just those two. So I've got that set up. I've hit my keyframe, my initial keyframes here, and we're ready to go. So with that, I want to go ahead and say, okay, opacity, we're going to bring that down to 0. All right. And then we'll come forward maybe 10 frames. So again, we can just use our Command Shift arrow key for 10 frames. And then let's make that opacity up to 100. All right. So how many times?
How many times have you struggled?
And then let's look at this and see how it feels.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer?
Okay, so let's get it out of there.
Struggled to find a compatible.
Before we get into photographer. So by here, we want it out of there. So this will be our position. Here, I'm going to move it down. Now I could just click it, hold down Shift to make sure I'm in a straight line and go that way, right? So that would set a keyframe there. Undo that. I could also come down here, move to my position, and there's my X and Y. So Y, I could just click and drag, right? Or enter in a value there as well. So that's a way we could do that. So now here,
how many times have you struggled to find a compatible?
And that's not what we want at all. So we want it to stay in place until we want it to start moving, right? So we'll have it come up.
How many times have you struggled?
And then before we head down, let's just go forward a little bit. And I'm going to scale in a little here so I can really see where we're at. So I'm just going to go forward a little bit. And instead of heading down, let's go forward 1, 2 frames. And I'm going to go ahead and just move it up just a hair, right? So that'll give us our little kind of anticipation. So let's see how that looks good.
How many times have you struggled?
Not enough there. There we go. Let's try it up there a little more there.
How many times have you struggled to find a...
Okay, so that's taken a long time to get out of there, right? So let's go ahead and move this last keyframe up forward.
How many times have you struggled to find...
Okay, so that's a little better. But let's move all of these. Oops. So let's just select these keyframes and move them forward a little bit.
Times have you struggled to find a compatible...
That seems pretty good.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible...
And then let's also get a fade going on that as well. I'm going to move this one in just a hair. And let's get a little fade going here. So we know we've got our opacity. And then as it starts moving down, maybe about here, let's click this little diamond here to set a keyframe at the same value, 100%. And then we can have it fade out to 0. Going here and fade out to 0. So we talked about earlier I/O, sort of similar to Premiere in out. We also have, our JK keys. Now, J and K here, instead of playing forward and backwards, jumps to keyframes. So if you know you want something to line up, you can always JK. J goes back to the previous keyframe, K goes forward. So that's a way to also move through there. So let's see how this goes.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible...
Okay, cool. So that seems fine. So that's just there. We're moving out. Maybe I'll bring this down a little bit. There we go. And
struggled to find a compatible photographer.
Great. So now we're going to start with this part. Again, I'm going to hit my Command or Control S to save just to make sure everything's good. And we can look up here and see where we're at. Now, we're going to have those icons come up. What I'm going to do for that is I'm going to create a separate composition for that icon. So let's go ahead and bring one in. So I'm going to roll down my assets vector. And the first one we talk about is photo. So let's go ahead and bring that one in first. So if I come in, I can set up, just drop it here. It'll start at the beginning. And I actually went below my gray solid. Sorry about that. There we go. Now we can see we've got our photo icon. So what we're going to want to do again is scale these up with a little bounce and then pop back and we'll add that little sparkle kind of flourish. We could do that in here and then sort of copy and paste keyframes onto the other ones. But what is nice, a nice thing we can do is create something called a nested comp or a pre-composition. And with that, you're just creating a new composition that you bring into another comp, and all of its animation values and things that you've done there are contained within it, but it just shows up as one item on your timeline, which for your main composition can be really nice because then you don't have 100 layers perhaps in that composition. Maybe you only have, 15, but a lot of those are compositions that have 5 or 10 layers themselves. But it's easier to stay organized and to adjust that way. So what I'm going to do is create a new composition for this. Now we could just create a new comp by composition or controller command in. We can also do something called pre-comp. And if we right click on our icon, you can see here we have pre-compose. And it'll give us some options. What do you want to call it? So I'm going to call it icon, or maybe I'll just call it photo comp. That seems good. And this is fine at the default, leave all attributes in the main comp. But if you wanted other things to come over, you could hit some of these as well. And you can also have it by default open your new composition. I'm just going to leave this at the default, hit OK. And now you can see up here, we've got a new composition called photo comp. And it put it in our comps folder, right? So we've got photo comp up in here now. And we also have photo comp on our timeline here. Now, if we double click on either one of these, it will take us into a new composition. And we can see we now have main comp down here in the tab and then photo comp. Now we're going to need this to move around. Now, if I took this icon now and I just dragged it up, you can see it's cutting off because our composition is only the size of that icon, which is 200 by 200, right? So if I came back to my main comp, you could see it's cutting off because the composition isn't big enough. So I'm going to undo, let me go back to my comp, photo comp, undo that movement, and then I'm going to reset this composition value. So I'm going to come up to my composition settings, or Command or Control K, and we've got photo comp, that's fine. And instead of 200 by 200, let's make this 720 by 720. And I've got lock aspect ratio on, so that's fine. We can hit OK. And now that's 720 by 720. So if we go back, we're still getting, we can see that comp now has that border, but this also goes to show that idea of the background is transparent. So if I come into my photo comp, it's got a black background, but back in the main comp, that doesn't show up, right? So that's good. All right, so let's go back into that composition, photo comp 1. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a little sound effect with this. So it's going to start off, let's go back to 0 here. And it's going to start off with a scale of 0. So let me get my scale, hit S for scale, set that, and let's bring that down to 0. And what we'll do, let's go forward 10 frames. So we could go ahead, Shift Control Arrow, right? We can also scale in if you want, and you could see your frames all the way to there. So there I'm at 10 frames. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this up to 105%. Let's do 107%. All right, so it's a little bigger than I want it to be. And then let's go forward 2 frames. I'm just going to hold down Command or Control, click, click. And then we'll take this down to maybe 95%. No, let's do 97%. So it's a little smaller than we want it to eventually be. Then we'll go 2 frames and let's make it 100. All right, let's see how that feels. All right, so that might be a little slow, but I think the bounce seems okay. Let's see it. All right. So let's grab these 3 keyframes and let's just scrunch them in a little bit. Good, that looks good. So what are we at? We're at here. Actually, I'm going to grab my last 2. Maybe nudge that over about a frame. Yeah, that feels good. Feels natural. All right, so all we're doing is a little overshoot here, right? We're scaling up, a little bit of overshoot. And let's go ahead and add in our little sound effect for this. So let me go back up to my audio. There's this blop. Let's add this in. All right, so that seems okay. I'm going to go ahead and move it forward a little bit just so it really feels like it's hitting when we're getting almost that maximum, pop at the screen. That's a little better. Great. So there's our little blop sound. And then we've got this. Now, what's nice is if we go back to our comp, we can look here.
How many times have you...
Right? And so that's got that sound and everything in here, but we don't have to worry about all of those different layers over here. We just have photo comp. All right, so let's go back to it. We've got the blop. That seems good. If I scale back down, when we created this created another 30-second comp. We may not need it to be 30 seconds, but we could, so if we wanted to take this down to maybe it's only 10 seconds long, we could take our preview range and do that. Now we could also use shortcuts for that using B and N. If we were to hit B here, that brings the beginning of our preview range to the time indicator. And if we hit N, say we moved it forward and hit N, that would bring the end of the preview range. Now what the preview range does, it just says where you start playing and stop playing. So if you want to keep looking at a certain area over and over again, you can use that. So if we took this, brought it down, maybe we just want that little part to keep playing over and over without playing the whole 30 seconds, we could do that, right? So you need to make sure your playhead's in there. Okay. Now for this one, if I want this to be 10 seconds, and let's say I get it down to about 10 seconds, then if we want this comp to only be 10 seconds long, we can go ahead and just right click and trim comp to work area. The shortcut for that is Command or Control plus Shift plus X. And now you can see what happened is this is only a 10-second comp now. If I go up to my composition settings, you can see we are now at 9 seconds and 29 frames. So there you go. All right, so that's another thing we can do, and we'll do that in our main comp here in a little bit. So that blop and sound effect seems fine. Now let's add our little sparkle. So for our sparkle, I'm going to go ahead and first I want to double check this is in the center. I'm pretty sure it is because we started with it there. But over here we've got our grids and guides. What I like to use is the proportional grid. It's basically we can get to our thirds pretty easily and see how we're feeling in a composition sense. We can also show those guides by using shortcuts of Option or Alt plus your apostrophe shows your proportional grid. And this Command or Control and apostrophe shows your standard grid. And again, all those settings can be changed in your preferences. So now with that, we've got our grid here. And what I want to do is we're going to create a little sparkle effect using trim paths and a repeater. So first off, we're going to create our first little line of the sparkle. And what I'm going to do here is create a new shape layer. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New, Shape Layer. And I like doing it this way because it automatically puts everything in the center. You can do a shape layer and draw on with your rectangle tool, etc. And then get it to the center and all of that. But I like kind of starting fresh sometimes to know exactly how everything's laid out. So now I'm going to go to my pen tool. And I'm going to go ahead and maybe start about right here. Hold down Shift, click here, and then maybe go up a little bit past that second line. Continue to hold Shift and click there. And that will be our little ray. So I'm going to go back to hit V to go back to my selection tool. And now let's go down here and click on the shape layer and see what we've got. So first off, I'm going to change the name of this to line. So let's go ahead and hit Enter. So I can change it, and line will be what we'll call that. I'm going to roll down here to see what we've got. So in a shape layer, we've got contents, there's our main shape, and then we've got our path, we've got a stroke, we've got a fill, and then the transform of that shape. Now you also then have the transform of the whole shape layer because you can have multiple shapes inside of a shape layer. In this case, we don't need a fill, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And we'll look at our stroke. And let's roll down here. We want that to be maybe, let's pick a new color. Let's grab one of the blues from inside this little guy. Let's see if this will work. So something maybe that little blue might be nice. All right. And we'll hit OK. Now on the stroke, I'm going to go ahead and make sure, let's see, that looks a little thick. So let's go 17. And here on the butt cap, yours is probably, you can see here, if we click off of it, it's just a straight edge. I can get rid of my proportional grid here for a second. It's just a straight edge, and that could be fine for some things, but what we want to do is change that to a round cap. And that'll give us a really nice, organic feel. All right, and that looks good there. So now what we'll do is let's add a trim path. And so in this line, again, in the shape layer, we'll roll it down. And here next to contents, there's a little add thing. So what I'm going to do is add trim path. And what a trim path does with any vector shape or a vector line, you can add a trim path and it will, by using the end and start points, sort of draw on and draw off your object. And then you can also then make it draw back off that way, right? So end and start. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with both of these at 0. So let's do start and end at 0. And we want to go ahead. Now I wasn't at my correct time frame, so I'm going to go ahead and just move back to the beginning, right? We'll see where that pops up. So maybe we want them to start about here. And I'll grab these 2 keyframes and move them back. All right. So then we'll have that happen. And then maybe again, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 8 frames later. So I just use my Command or Control arrow key. Let's go ahead and bring both of them up to 100. And then what I'm going to do is take this top one, the start, and move it back a little bit. So now we'll get it kind of following behind. So let's see how that looks. All right, that's not very dramatic. So let's move this out a little bit longer. Move just this top one in. See how that feels. All right, and maybe move them both in. All right. Okay. So, all right, that's there. That's not very exciting. So what we could do is we could copy this and then rotate it a little bit, copy it, rotate it, copy it, rotate it. But we're not going to need to do that. We're going to use a repeater. So what we'll do is come in here in our same shape layer, our line shape layer, and we're going to add another object, a little modifier called a repeater. Now with that repeater, we can roll that down. Now again, these can start to get really crazy. When you get into a lot of shape layers and multiple shapes inside of shape layers and all your sort of effectors or modifiers, and get really crazy. So keeping these together can really help you, keep going. So you can rename all of these as well. So if we called this, sparkle copy or something like that, you could do that as well. Now with a repeater, what that does, let me move here where we can see our shape. A repeater just creates copies. So our first option here is copies, and here we are. We're just sort of creating a couple copies. Then down below here where the transform of the repeater is how much that is moving. So if I start bringing this down, you can see not as far apart, right? And then we could go through and do all that. But what we want to do is we want these to be in a radial shape around our object. So we're going to go ahead and take that repeater position and make it 0. And we're going to want, let's say we want 10 copies. So I've got 10 up here. And I want to rotate that around. So this is where a little bit of that high school math comes back in. There's 360 degrees in a circle, right? If we have 10 copies, then we'd want every 36 degrees of rotation for there to be one. So now you could get, eyeball this and just click and drag till it looks about right? So right there, that looks good, and it's at 36 degrees. So we're good to go there. Now if we play this, let's see how this feels. Okay, that's a little better. So what we could do though is now this is still all very linear. All of our keyframes are very linear. So what I'm going to do is select all of these keyframes and then hit F9, which is easy ease. So hit your function key, F9. You can see now they look a little more like hourglasses. Let's see how this feels. That's got a little more ease to it. And we could come back in, and if you think that's going too far out or anything like that, we could always adjust that by the position of our stroke, right? So our general shape here, we could come in here and look at where he is. And if we wanted to, we could bring down that Y, right, and adjust some of that. And then so there we go, and adjust those. So once you get this started, you can fine tune this till your heart's content. We also want to easy ease our little bounce, our pop in. So let's go to that guy, roll it down, again, hit our U. So we get everything that's been animated, select all those keyframes, and hit that old F9, or you can right click, do keyframe assistant, and do easy ease. And you can see there it's F9. Now we've got those. Now this should all feel a little more organic. There we go. All right, so I think that looks good. Let's come back to our main comp, see how it looks.
How many times have you
Great. Now, since we have this marker here, we can just sort of take our photo comp and we can move that to photo. So we know that's kind of right there. So let's see how that feels.
Photographer, videographer.
All right. So let's go back in here, and that little sound effect is a little loud. So let's come back to our photo comp and go to that blop. And if we roll this down, we can have our audio keyframe here. Roll that down, and there's audio levels. Now, while you have that selected, if you're up in audio, you can see this will adjust that as well. So if we come in, that's a little better, but let's bring it down a little more to maybe about -9. That feels good. Okay, so there we go. So we took that at -9 dB, and we've got that set up. Now to create our other ones, what we want to do is we're just going to duplicate our comp and then swap out the icon so we don't have to create all that work again. So what I'm going to do is come back in here, and I'm going to go to my main comp, and you might think, well, let's just do it here. Let's take the photo comp. I'm going to hit Command or Control D for duplicate. And then I've got this sort of new one. Let's change it to, let's double click it. And we could go in here and change it to a different name. But then when I double clicked it, you can see it's still the photo comp here, and we don't have, we've got two here, but when I double click both of them, it selects that photo comp. So what's happening here, it's not with a duplication in your layer window, in your timeline, it is just, it'll duplicate any changes. So if you change something in that comp, it's just a reference to this comp up here in your project window. So what I want to do is go back to my main comp, get rid of one of those, and I want to duplicate up here in my comps window. So up here, if I do my control duplicate, or command, control or command, there we go, photo comp 2. Let's go ahead and hit enter on that, change it to video comp. All right, now when I double click that, it's still going to be the photo comp, but what I can do, select this icon, Photo AI, right? Roll down my assets. This is our video one. So you want to hold down Option or Alt and then drop it right on that layer. And you'll see it'll swap it out. And then that way, we've got all that together, saved. That's great. And then we can do the same thing. And we can duplicate by Command or Control D. And we'll make this one Design Comp. Same thing. Bring it in, select Design. Hold down Option or Alt, drop it on, swaps it out, and you're good to go. The nice thing about that is now that these are also all individual, if you did want to alter it a little, change something up, you could go into each comp and swap that out. So we're here, we've got it happening, and we say, let's go back to our main comp. And now we've got our how many times. So let's organize this a little bit better. So let's bring our photo comp to the top. Let's drag down our video comp next. And let's drag down our design comp above that. So now we'll have them in order. So we've got photo, then theoretically we should be able to just grab video, nudge that, nudge that down to here, right? And then we've got our graphic designer. So again, since I showed earlier how we could jump in between keyframes, right? With our J and K, it'll also work with markers. So if I came in here and we're in our layer view here, I can jump to graphic designer. I've got design comp fit. So what do I have to do? Just hit that bracket key, left bracket, and that'll snap right to the graphic design. So for exacting, that's pretty nice. Now, these are just not...
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project?
Okay, so that's not what we want, but let's go ahead and see what we can do here. So what we'll want to do is we want photographer first, right? So let's get somewhere where we can see that icon. And what we want to do is just move this comp over. So let's go ahead and pop open our old friend, the proportional grid. And I'm just going to, you can use your arrow keys here now to move the layer, but I'm going to shift over until I'm about lined up right there. That looks good. So that'll be our photo. Jump to video. Get to where we can see it. Video's in the right spot. And then let's get up to design. And design needs to come over the other way. So again, you could click and drag it, or just do your Command Control arrow keys. So now let's take a peek.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project?
Okay, so graphic designer is being a little weird here. We're not getting our pop. So let's look at that comp. What's going on there? All right, so we've got this. And somehow, oh, we still have, so what happened there? I didn't notice. I just dragged it in. I missed my thing. So let me go ahead and get rid of that. Delete. Make sure this is still looking good. There we go. So now I need to, again, go up to my design. Hold down my option, drag, and make sure I'm on top. Oh, I didn't have it selected. That's what it is. So make sure you have it selected. Drag and drop. Now we should be good. We hadn't tested it. There we go. So now everything will be changed in the main comp, and we should be good. Real quick.
Photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project.
All right, so that feels good. What I'm going to do, one last thing. Let's throw a little rectangle around here at the end.
And graphic designer for your project.
Okay, and I think this can end at 10 seconds. So 10 seconds there, make sure you're there. You can always come over here, select that, type in 10.0, you'll jump to 10 seconds. And let's do our same thing there. Let's use our in for our preview range to stop there. And just to make sure it's at the beginning, I think it is. So now we could go ahead and do our old right click, trim comp to work area. So now we've got a 10-second comp. We don't have all that extra time and we're in good shape. So the last thing I want to do is draw on that little rectangle. So graphic designer, and maybe about right here, we'll start that. So let's create another shape layer. Layer, new shape. And we'll call this rectangle. And we've got the same thing here. So let's add in, let's roll down and see what we've got. No contents yet. Let's add a rectangle. And we will take that, roll that down, and we've got our size. So right now, it's at 100 by 100. So let's go ahead and, on our X, take that up to about, what are we there? Say 375, that looks good. Uncheck this sort of constrained proportions. Then our Y, our Y is 375. And our X, let's take that up to 1,000. Okay, that feels good. Let's add a little bit of roundness to it. So maybe 100. All right, so we'll have a little rounded rectangle. And then we need to add a stroke because we can't see anything yet. So same thing up here. Add a stroke. Great. And we're also going to need a trim path. So let's add a trim path. So with our stroke, let's figure out what we want that to be. Roll it down. We will get the color. Let's go with a lighter gray, perhaps. And maybe a darker gray. Let's say 35. And let's give that a stroke width, maybe 20. Great. And now we've got our trim path here. And the same thing with the stroke. We're going to be drawing this on, so we will see the end of that. So let's go and make that a round cap as well. And then when we get down here to our trim path up here, same thing. So what we're going to do, let's see what we're sounding like. Let's
photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project.
Okay, so
graphic designer for your.
So maybe around here we'll start drawing it on. So let's go ahead with our trim path, start and end, and we'll make those both 0. And let's go forward.
Your project.
Maybe around to 9 seconds. And we'll bring end up to 0 or to 100.
And graphic designer for your project.
Okay, I'm going to just move that up a little bit because I think
and graphic designer for your project.
Okay, that feels good. Maybe a little bit more. All right, so a couple things. Let's easy ease those, hit the F9. And the other thing I want to do is let's figure out where we want this to start. I want this to start down at the bottom. So this is where our offset. I'm not going to keyframe it. I'm just going to change that so it starts right about there. So this will feel like now to draw in from the bottom.
Graphic designer for your project.
Good. That feels good. Maybe move this a little bit forward so it's a little faster.
Videographer and graphic designer for your project.
Nudge it forward just a hair. There we go. All right, so let's see what this all looks like. Roll out.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project?
All right, so that's a basic thing. Let's throw in do our last little tweaks on audio. We want to throw in our background music. So let's come in here to music, drop that in here. Let's just drop that in by the VO. And again, see how where we're at.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer?
Okay, so that music's really loud, but we also need to make sure that we get our VO up to where we want it. So let's go ahead and we'll mute the music for a second by just clicking the speaker icon. And I'm going to highlight my voiceover, and let's hear where we're at and look at our levels up here.
How many times have you...
Okay, so we know we need this to come up.
Have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project?
Okay, so I think that will...
How many times have you...
Still a little hot.
Have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project?
Okay, that's good. We're not ever hitting the peaks. So that'll be our baseline there. I think our blops still sound okay in the background. And so with the music, let's go ahead and we know we want to bring that down some. So let's see where we're at.
How many times have you struggled to find a compatible photographer, videographer,
still a little loud,
and graphic designer for your project?
Yeah, it is not... Again, After Effects isn't the best for audio adjustment. So, it's...
How many times have you struggled to find a...
So I think that feels pretty good. So we'll do -10. And what we can do then at the end...
Find a compatible photographer, videographer, and graphic designer for your project.
Okay, and then at the end what we can do is just sort of fade out that music. So let's go to the end, look at our audio level here, and let's go maybe at about 1 Mississippi. So let's go about 8:15, and we will set an audio level there, go forward, almost to the end, and let's bring this down. We can roll down our waveform here to see how it's looking. So maybe somewhere right about there. Let's see if that's too much.
For your project.
Okay, that's
How many
nice.
times have you...
All right, so hopefully that was pretty clear and helped with some just general tips and techniques inside of After Effects. Obviously, a lot of shortcuts. Those can really speed up your workflow. So I hope you found this useful. So I will see you in the next tutorial, and thanks for watching.